Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next session of the day. Today we have two sessions in one, or two presentations in one, I should say. The first one is called Cross-Departmental Training and Collaboration, Group Learning for Linked Data, BIBFRAME and Sinopia. This will be presented by Gioia Stevens and Charlene Chou. Our second presentation will be Converting BIBFRAME Data to MARC, and that'll be presented by Jody Williamson. We will introduce the presenters by their particular order of presentation. So first I will give you a little bit of background on Gioia Stevens and Charlene Chou. I myself am Paul Bethke. I work at the Iowa City Public Library as a cataloger, children's librarian, and a bookmobile driver. It's a lot of fun. I recommend it if you ever get a chance to drive a bookmobile, nothing better in the world. I'd also like to express gratitude for living in historically Sauk, Meskwaki, and Kickapoo lands in eastern Iowa. It's a very beautiful part of the country. If you've ever been here, you'll know what I mean. Now, on to the biographies. For Gioia Stevens, she notes that she is a librarian for specialized cataloging in the Knowledge Access Department, working closely with NYU Special Collections. Her research interests include analyzing library collections as data and applying digital humanity methods to rare book bibliography. And Charlene writes that she is the head of Knowledge Access Department, managing cataloging and metadata services at the New York University Libraries. Charlene's research interests lie primarily in the area of the discovery of multilingual resources, identity management, controlled vocabularies, AI, NLP tools for subject indexing, digital scholarship, and inclusive metadata. Also joining me today is Michelle Frutornik. She will be monitoring the Q&A channels as well as the chat, and we will do a Q&As at the end of each of the individual presentations, and then if we have time at the end, we'll do a group one to clean up any unanswered questions at that point. Now, enough of me. It's time to turn over to Gioia and Charlene. Take it away.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Thank you all for joining us. As you can see, the title of our presentation is about the group learning for linked data. Gioia and Charlene are going to share NYU stories with you all. Next. On this agenda slide, you can see Gioia and Charlene are going to be the storytellers. We will share how the story began, how the story evolved. Why did we establish the BIBFRAME Study Group for linked data, BIBFRAME and Sinopia training? At the end, we will share our future plans briefly. Next. So when I started working at NYU in January 2020, I was very excited to join the Share-VDE working groups. And our associate deans serve on the Share-VDE Advisory Committee, and three of us serve on 3 working groups, including Authority Identified Management Services, Cluster Knowledge Base Editor, and Sapiential Entity Identification working groups. And on the other hand, I noticed some challenges. For example, NYU did not participate in the linked data LD4P2 Sinopia project. So that means most colleagues didn't have hands-on experience to create native BIBFRAME data. As of January 2020, NYU didn't have any official training on linked data and BIBFRAME before. And there were no communication between the working group members at NYU. This is almost like a silo. So we agree a local group need to be established in terms of communications, collaboration, and holistic planning. Next. So that's how the story began in April 2020. So we established a NYU Share-VDE working group. And the purpose is for communication, collaboration, and it's chaired by the head of knowledge access. As you can see here, working group members, including 1 Share-VDE advisory committee member and 4 working group members. And we added 2 unit supervisors because it's very important for the planning of testing and training. So they join us just after 1 month. So in each meeting, each working group members provide updates. So we are able to see the whole picture, from the 3 working groups and 1 advisory committee. And the chair also share the reports with the metadata policy and implementation committee at NYU. So that's why I also keep other stakeholders, on the same page. One of the key tasks is done by this working group is data mapping and conversion. And this, I would say, is really ongoing tasks. So first, we start from having the Share-VDE convert our MARC data into triples for members to review and study. So we still remember, we received the file, but some member want to review the file, we read it through the turtle. So that's why, thanks to our colleague from System Office DAI, Nancy Lin, to recommend using EasyRDF converter. So we were able to review the data in different kind of RDF formats. We also use BIBFRAME comparison tools and specs. For example, MARC to BIBFRAME, BIBFRAME to MARC. So we were able to really evaluate converted data and also make all the working group member, we are able to compare and understand the BIBFRAME data. So we also create a spreadsheet for the members to input comments. So we won't duplicate the efforts. So next slide, please. So this is just an example. You can see this is for the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion. And you can see we try to include information like a missing MARC tag data or something incorrect, or we can share comments. And on the other hand, you can see here, we could disagree with each other for really, really meaningful discussions. So you can see some sort of follow-up comments and also what kind of action we should take. Next slide, please. So this is another part is, this part is really focused on serials and continuing resource. You can see different kind of type of resources have different kind of concern. And that's why you see a lot of detailed discussion here. Next slide, please. So since we have this working group focused on data mapping and conversion, and we could see this kind of survey code from this service, PCC Standing Committee on Application. They're doing a survey for, review BIBFRAME to MARC conversion data, and as they try to indicate the purpose is to see how institutions use the conversion specs and tools and any kind of roadblocks encountered to convert natively created BIBFRAME data into MARC 21 format. So as you can see, we already have the spreadsheet. So based on the spreadsheet, so NYU could submit our feedback by September 2020. And later on, we see the PC Standing Committee on Application had another survey. It's about MARC 21 authority format and Wikidata mapping. Again, 3 working group and members were able to discuss. And we, again, share our comments in the spreadsheet and submit our comments to the ACA chair right away. On the other hand, we also see this kind of survey code from authoritative data working groups as the first charter to have a survey to prioritize catalog user stories. So for this case, working group member also work with another working group member is from authority working group. So we were able to submit our comments. For the second charter, prioritize potential topics for second charter of best practice. We were able to send our comments quickly as well. So I also want to say a few recent activities. The working group member also provide data mapping information, for example, comparison tables for discussion during the BIBFRAME study group meeting and also for the PCC Wikidata pilot. And this summer, 3 working group members, we're going to work together and really want to submit some sample record to test for Share-VDE authority services. Next slide, please. So how the story evolved. So during the working group member, we also have some presentation simply for discussion. We also gave a Sinopia demo. However, we really want to see more NYU colleagues able to get a training. So BIBFRAME Study Group was established to provide training in BIBFRAME linked data for the entire technical service group. And we want even beyond technical service group. So as you can see, our training goal is really want to see the phenomena from a spark to a frame. As you can see, the beginning, it's just 5 members. They added 2 more members, become 7 members. But now it's going much, much more. And Gioia is really the co-owner of BIBFRAME Study Group. Now go back to you. Now go to you, Gioia.
Okay, thank you, Charlene. In this section of the presentation, I'm going to be discussing the BIBFRAME Study Group. So we started this group with one basic professional goal: to help our staff gain the knowledge they need to transition from MARC to BIBFRAME. And we had 2 very basic outcomes: a basic understanding of linked data and a basic understanding of BIBFRAME. It was a cross-departmental group. As Charlene explained, our membership widened by quite a bit. So we had catalogers, archivists, acquisition specialists, research services and subject specialists, as well as data technologists. The plan for the group, it was really an informal study group, which was a very nice thing. NYU, I suppose, like many other libraries, has numerous working groups and task groups, and this was really a study group just for learning, and I think everyone found that very refreshing. We met every 2 weeks over Zoom for the course of 1 semester. Staff from all those different departments volunteered based on their own interest in the subject. And at the beginning, the group shared what they would like to learn, plus norms for our group discussions. So to give some structure to the study group, we used a textbook, linked data for the Perplexed Librarian, an ALA book that was published last year. This is a very accessible and fun introduction written just for librarians. And the book has 7 chapters, so it worked nicely to read one for each meeting over the course of the semester. Some of the key concepts in the book that we addressed over the course of the semester were things like defining all of these ideas and making sure everyone understood them. The World Wide Web versus the semantic web, URIs versus URLs, RDF statements versus MARC records, bibliographic records, graph nodes and relationships, a little bit about triple stores, conceptual discussions about controlled vocabularies versus ontology, and an introduction to SPARQL queries. In addition to reading the book and discussing it as a group, we also did several hands-on exercises, and I'm going to cover 3 of them here. What are MARC tags mapped to WEMI, then creating RDF triples, and then a Wikidata demo SPARQL query. So the first one, what are MARC tags mapped to WEMI? This is an exercise Charlene created. It's a useful refresher on work, expression, manifestation, and item. So for members of our group that might not have thought about this for some time, it was a valuable way to think about data models as we move from MARC records to RDF statements. And then we actually created our own triples as an experiment. We didn't learn how to code. We just tried out the RDF format to see how it works. So just to make it super simple, we used an example from the textbook, which uses the band Parliament Funkadelic throughout the book as an example. It's a really fun book. So this is just some very basic RDF from the textbook, setting out the schema, setting up these relationships that George Clinton, shown in the picture, is a member of the band Parliament and also a producer of the work, which is actually the album, The Mothership Connection. So we also experimented with running these triples in a graph on the online super easy RDF grapher tool. So those are those same triples, just, as a graph. And then we tried to recreate this exercise using our own information. So everyone made some triples for their own favorite album. So just some basic instructions. All these links are in the slides that you can get later. So people looked for URIs on Library of Congress or Wikidata or VIAF, and then they explored schema.org to look for property terms. And then they simply copied over the example triples and experimented in with substituting their own terms. We copied the code into EasyRDF Converter, also a very nice, easy online tool, so you can see the triples in different syntaxes. And also this validates the code, so you may get an error message, and then you have to tinker with it to see what might have gone wrong, which is a learning experience unto itself. And then everyone copied their code into the RDF grapher to see what it looked like. And then the third X group exercise I'll discuss was we did a demo Sparkle query in Wikidata. I came up with the question, how many islands are in New York City and what are their names? And Alex Provo, our wonderful metadata librarian and resident Wikidata expert, devised a Wikidata query to answer this question. This link in the slide will actually run the query if you want to check it out from the slide later, but I have a couple of screenshots. This is the long list of islands that came up. It's a pretty wide range, a lot of little islands in New York City that are uninhabited and most people don't really know about. And you can also write in Wikidata, graph these to get a sense of how everything is linked up. So these are all of the islands in Manhattan, plus islands in Queens. It was too large to show everything, but it's fun to play around with. And this Sparkle query wasn't just a fun thing to do. It raised some interesting group discussion questions. The most basic one being how to structure a query. How do you pull in a sufficiently wide range of information on Wikidata and then narrow it down to what it is that you want? Some sort of offbeat things like how to define an island. This picture shows Uthant Island, an artificial island that was created in the East River of New York City. This actually came up in our results. And most important, how to scope inconsistent hierarchies of geographic headings in Wikidata. Wikidata is all user contributed information, as we all know. So it's extremely different information than from what we're used to seeing in MARC and in authorities data. For example, Staten Island did not appear on our results list because for some reason on Wikidata, it had not been coded as part of New York City. There were also some interesting questions regarding Long Island, which is not part of New York City officially, but the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens are geographically part of Long Island. So interesting conceptual discussions as we move from MARC into linked data. Overall, our discussions focused on real-world practical applications of linked data in libraries. We shared many additional examples and resources in our group wiki page. And also we had a very diverse group with different levels of experience with regard to coding, technology, familiarity with web technology, and facilitating these discussions was challenging but meaningful. We really did learn a lot from each other over the course of the semester. And also in our group, we were looking forward to future initiatives that NYU is involved with, Share-VDE and Sinopia. A lot of this has already been covered over the course of this week and other sessions of this conference. So I'll just make this fairly quick and Share-VDE is a library-driven initiative that currently connects 22 university libraries. It's a shared discovery environment based on linked data. And as Charlene described earlier, our existing library catalogs are converted from MARC to RDF using the BIBFRAME vocabulary and other ontologies. And Sinopia is a linked data creation environment developed by LD4P that allows you to create native BibFrame data without having to set up and maintain a lot of tools. It's a cooperative cataloging environment, and you can contribute feedback and expertise to the iterative development of this tool. So in the last session of our first semester of the BIBFRAME Study Group, I gave everyone an overview of the Sinopia editor. Each member created their own account to experiment. That's a really nice thing about Sinopia. Anyone can create an account with an email address and then create records. I did a live demo over Zoom to show cataloging the book step by step. And in this demo, I emphasized the linking of the work, instance, and item. And I think it was here's just a view of the editor with this monograph instance unnested template, and emphasizing how this was done as a real cataloging workflow was a great way to really bring the idea of linked data much more clearly in people's minds, especially when they saw that we were not creating a record in the traditional sense, but rather a set of linked statements. So our future plans, we plan to continue with a study group now called the Linked Data Study Group going forward in the next academic year. And we're also planning to start a Sinopia testing and training group. And that brings us to the end. So thank you. Maybe Charlene has some additional comments, or we should just go on to the next presentation.
I only want to make one comment, Gioia. I still hear very positive feedback from our members. Like yesterday, someone say, BIBFRAME Study Group is such success. So I just want to thank you to be the wonderful coordinator.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very nice to hear. It was very satisfying work. I appreciate that. Right. So I guess I will stop screen share and we will move on.
Thank you, Gioia and Charlene. That was very informative. We do have one question up. I will turn that over to Michelle to address.
Yeah, the question is, it says the study group is fabulous. Do you think it can be reused by other groups, even across institutions? And would you be willing to share your 7-week plan with your discussion questions and exercises for others to use?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's part of the reason we're doing this presentation, because last year when I was planning for this, I was looking for a similar example, and there was a great group at the University of Texas Libraries, I believe, but that was more really librarian research focused and wasn't really for all of the staff in a particular department with lots of different members. So yeah, the slides will include all the information I just showed you, and I could put up, I'd have to clean it up a little bit, but I could put up a sample outline as well.
That would be wonderful.
Also, Gioia created a wonderful wiki page for all the resources. So that would be wonderful to share as well.
Oh yeah, please, if you could share that in the chat, that would be great.
Okay, I can't share it right now because it's on NYU's closed login wiki, but I will move those resources to a place where other people can find them.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Great. Well, if there are any more questions for Charlene or Gioia later, please go ahead and feel free to throw them into the Q&A. Right now, though, we're going to shift on over to Jody Williamson and her presentation on converting MARC data to MARC, or excuse me, converting BIBFRAME data to MARC. A little bit on Jody. She is the Metadata Standards Specialist in the Network Development and MARC Standards Office at the Library of Congress. She's part of the BIBFRAME development team and focuses on data conversion, BIBFRAME editor profile creation and maintenance, software troubleshooting, and assisting the catalogers in the library's cataloging pilot. Now, for those of you who attended the previous session on BIBFRAME 100, she was definitely mentioned by Sally McCallum. So this is almost like an supplement or an add-on addition to that presentation. So hopefully you'll get even more information on what's going on there. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jody.
Thank you. And I will get my presentation up. There we go. So I'm going to talk about converting BIBFRAME data to MARC and the permutations that we have gone through at the Library of Congress to make this possible. So the first question to ask is, why convert BIBFRAME data back to MARC? And the reality is that data movement between systems is a key component of all library operations. And it's not just within the library, it's within a library, it's interacting with outside vendors, authorities and ordering vendors and other silos of information within your organization. Many of these systems are still dependent on MARC. I am personally afraid that there is a setup at a book jobber that was coded so long ago that the person who wrote it retired, and it runs on MARC and it works just fine, and we don't know what's going to happen when that program needs to be changed to work with non-MARC data. And even within a library organization, our systems are not 100% MARC free yet. We also needed a BIBFRAME to MARC conversion program at the Library of Congress, since currently our pilot cataloging participants are doing their work twice, once within BIBFRAME and once within the local ILS, which is Voyager. So since the pilot started in 2017, we've learned a lot about converting MARC records into BIBFRAME works, instances, and items. So on the left side of this screen is a portion of a MARC record, and on the right side is a very small representation of what that MARC record is being turned into in BIBFRAME. And we've gotten really good at pulling all of these elements apart and creating BIBFRAME works, BIBFRAME instances, and BIBFRAME items that we can use within our editor and our database. These programs have been continuously modified and improved since they were introduced in 2017. We use this internally every day as we transform data that is output from the Voyager system and loaded into the BIBFRAME database. But turning these triples back into a single MARC format is less straightforward. On this screen, I have little triples from work, instances, items, and admin metadata. And they need to be combined into a single MARC record. And it's also important to remember that there are two parts to creating a MARC record. First, you have to create a data set that adheres to the MARC communications format with the leader, the directory of MARC tags, using the right hex values for the subfield codes. And the current MARC conversion program has always done this consistently and correctly. So that was a really big obstacle that was overcome very quickly when we started this process. Now, the second part of creating a MARC record is populating these fields, and that's what we'll probably focus on here. So as with our MARC to BIBFRAME conversion, BIBFRAME to MARC has a set of specifications, and many of the transformations are kind of straightforward. In this example, this is an extent triple. It's got the number of pages, and then there's also the dimension statement, which has the measurements. And these two separate triples can be combined into a single MARC tag 300 based on the specifications. Even though in MARC to BIBFRAME, that 300 field has been blown and put into two distinct instance properties, they are able to be recombined into the single MARC field. And this is another example of a pretty straightforward conversion where the work ISSN identifier can be placed in MARC tag 022 subfield A, and the code of the agency assigning the ISSN, which in this case is the US ISN Center, can be placed back into the subfield 2. Unfortunately, not all aspects of the conversion are that clear. So we made some initial decisions that we hoped would simplify the process. So we initially said we won't have an 007 field because all of the data elements that we are converting from the 007 field are reflected in the 34X fields within MARC. So we don't need to duplicate it. And we have been working with our catalogers in the pilot to put native script data into BIBFRAME fields, and we wanted those to go into the quote unquote regular MARC field so that the summary in Chinese script would be in the 520 field and not in a paired 880 field. We also wanted to create just a basic 008 field with the date entered, the type of date, the date 1, the date 2, the place of publication, and the language fields, or the bytes that are standardized across all of the different iterations of the 008 field. And we thought, this is all that's needed. We were very wrong about that. I think we had only distributed maybe a handful of records internally, and the feedback came back pretty uniformly negative about those particular decisions. So we first modified the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion program to create a basic 007 field where the first 2 bytes of the 007 are populated. Our public catalog, catalog.loc.gov, uses these first 2 bytes of the 007 field as a type of material facet, and we needed to continue that functionality with the converted data. We also got feedback from the US ISSN Center that told us that the 008 field needed to be format specific to facilitate data exchange with the International ISN Center. And so we created format specific 008 fields. This particular example is for a serial where we've got the date type of C for currently published. We have the B to indicate that the frequency is bi-monthly. We have R to indicate that the frequency is regular. And we have the P to indicate that this particular title is a periodical. And this functionality for format-specific 008s also extends to all of the records that are getting converted. So here's a music-specific 008 field where we have PP to indicate popular music. And then there's the value D to indicate that there's a libretto or text with this recording. As we were working through the earliest iterations of this program, we learned a lot about the library's data. The MARC to BIBFRAME conversion had exposed to us a lot of the duplication in MARC, but using BIBFRAME to MARC exposed the duplication in a much more amplified format, because all of these form genre terms that are originally in an 007 field or an 008 field, an 047, 360, and the 65X fields were all going back in to the 655 field. And so you'd have a lot of duplication within the fields. And it's the same thing, particularly for audiovisual material characteristics, that as we pulled those out of the 007 and 008 fields and gave those individual codes a label and a URI, we wanted to put those back in so that all of that information was retained, which meant putting them into 34X fields, which meant duplicating the information that the cataloger had already put into the 34X field and the 007 field. While we were going through this process, we also discovered that there were values in the 007 and also the 008 fields that were not duplicated in the 34X fields. And so I wrote several MAC discussion papers and proposals, and they were prepared and adopted. And so we are knowingly introducing more duplication into MARC, which we hope this is sort of a temporary bridge as we move toward a fully linked data environment. Another challenge about the BIBFRAME to MARC data conversion is that MARC to BIBFRAME was sort of plopping the same admin metadata on the work, the instance, and the item. All of these elements were identical, except sometimes the catalogers would want to change part of it, or as we look more at more complicated workflows, there might be reasons for the admin metadata to be different on the work instance and item, and how are we going to reflect that in the final MARC record? And we're still working through that. Also, reverse engineering MARC to BIBFRAME to create BIBFRAME to MARC is not always direct. There's a question of shaping. So this is an example of a work with an instance and an item that has a related instance, and they all have their own admin metadata, and it has a related work that goes to a hub, and that hub might point to another work. And the question becomes, where do you draw the line to say these pieces become a single MARC record, and which are just reflected as a relationship? If you draw the line too tightly, you won't get the relationship fields at all in the 7xx fields. And if you draw too big of a circle around all of this information, you're going to create a single MARC record that reflects multiple resources, which isn't really good either. Our initial goal was to create a MARC record from one work in one instance, but it's hard to draw such a distinct decision because of all of the relationships that are embedded in a single MARC record. And now that hubs are part of our BIBFRAME framework, we have another layer of data that needs to be abstracted back into a single MARC record, mostly in terms of uniform titles. There were also some interesting challenges with sort of the nitty-gritty details of our BIBFRAME to MARC conversion. First, we had to reinsert subfields into authorized access fields, particularly names. So on the left, I'm showing a triple of an agent with the URI for the creator and then the label for Michael Lewis. And then on the right, you see that the subfields have been reinserted, but id.loc.gov uses the MADS vocabulary, and MADS RDF doesn't have like a little line that says, oh, hey, here's what I am in MARC. And some, but not all, of the unique elements of a heading have equivalents in the MADS vocabulary. And so the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion actually has a series of lookups to transform that URI that's in the triple to the heading with the subfield that's presented on the right side. And after doing all of that work, then we are also putting the URI into subfield 0 to retain it. Another challenge is subjects and URIs. And our current practice is to retain as many URIs as possible. In this particular subject on the left, there's a URI for the overarching subject, which is libraries fiction. There's also a URI for the topical subject in subfield A, which is libraries. There's also a URI for the genre form subdivision in subfield B, which is fiction. So on the right, it's an attempt to reflect what's going on in the MARC field in an odd space. So the first URI that you see in the first subfield 0 is the URI for the entire string. Then you have the individual components and the URIs that follow. This creates some pretty complicated fields, and there's also the potential for inconsistency in areas where the individual component does not have a URI. So the subject fields that we're seeing currently in the data can be a little inconsistent in terms of how many URIs there are and where they are placed. And we're working on a resolution for that. Then there's the 880 fields. We had hoped to move all native script out of the 880 fields and reduce the amount of transliteration performed by catalogers, but we learned this decision particularly impacts our local acquisitions processing. So in this screen, the example on the right was a MARC record that one of our pilot catalogers mocked up to demonstrate for us what the problems are. So you can see that the 245 title is in Chinese characters, as is the addition statement. And then on the left, you see what this looks like in our Voyager acquisitions module, where the title is a series of dots, quotes, it's hard to tell. There's really nothing here that an acquisition staffer can use to verify that the material they're holding matches what was ordered. So we're modifying both the MARC to BIBFRAME and BIBFRAME to MARC conversions to include more transliteration to resolve this issue because as Sally and Judith and Paul talked about in BIBFRAME 100, we have to keep working with our local ILS system to facilitate moving all the catalogers into BIBFRAME. Also within converting data like this, there's sort of a tension between the ideal and the practical. This program that we've been working on, it's a bulk operation. And when you're processing millions of triples, you do have to make some default decisions. And if you were to do a byte by byte analysis of the original MARC record and how it was converted from MARC to BIBFRAME and then from BIBFRAME to MARC, there will be some differences. And so you have to assess where these differences are important and where they are cosmetic. The example here is that the added title has a 246 field with a first indicator of 3 and a second indicator of 0. And we had to make some mass decisions about converting variant titles from BIBFRAME to MARC. And so it's become MARC tag 246, first indicator of 1 and second indicator of 0. And I question if this is a loss of system functionality or if there's something larger going on that would require more work on our part to make a change. And this type of data conversion also makes you question the placement of the data, especially why is the same information entered in multiple places? Because in the BIBFRAME editor, we don't expect the catalogers to enter all of this information multiple times. Here's another example of that, where individual biography is coded in the 008, which becomes a BIBFRAME genre form with a URI. And so then it goes back into a 655. Is the data less useful because it's in a different field? Is it less informative that the 007 of a base material of paper becomes MARC tag 340 subfield A? The data elements are the same, regardless of location in the MARC record. And I think we are still resolving where some of these decisions will fall, if we will have to change the conversion to become more detailed, or if putting this information into variable fields with URIs is equally useful. But it's not all gloom and doom. Our conversion has also had the surprise benefit of some data cleanup. For instance, in the 020 fields of many MARC records, the qualifier information was just inside parentheses as part of subfield A of the identifier field. We were able to key on the parens and the text in the MARC to BIBFRAME conversion and move that information into a separate BIBFRAME property called qualifier. And then when it comes back from BIBFRAME to MARC, since those elements have been separated, they remain separated, and the qualifier information goes into subfield Q without having to do a lot of MARC data cleanup within your existing database. Another change is that all of the 260 fields become 264 fields because both fields become BIBFRAME provision activity statements, and they all go back and are treated in the same way. We also are supplying 337, 336, 337, and 338 fields for a lot of MARC records that do not have them, because we're creating the content, media, and carrier fields based on elements in the leader, the 007, the 008, and we have a lot of if-then qualifiers going on, particularly in the MARC to BIBFRAME conversion, where if this field doesn't exist and this value in this other field equals something, then supply the content field in this example. And then since the BIBFRAME record will have the content triple, it will become a 336 field. There's also less ISBD punctuation in the records that are converted from BIBFRAME to MARC. We remove it during MARC to BIBFRAME, particularly when there's a single MARC field that is split into multiple BIBFRAME properties. We're able to say remove the punctuation associated with each subfield. And we're not reinserting it when these fields are recompiled into MARC. However, during our testing, we have discovered that some of the cataloger supply punctuation, particularly data or the square brackets that enclose cataloger supply data, we're getting inconsistently removed, and we're modifying the conversion programs to retain the square brackets in particular, since they have a lot of meaning within the record. As far as our ongoing workflow, once this process is incorporated, I anticipate that the data will be converted to MARC and loaded as a batch process. And we also have to draw a line around what cataloging functions can be performed in the BIBFRAME editor and what functions will remain within Voyager. This was mentioned in the previous presentation with Sally McCallum, Judith Cannon, and Paul Frank as well. Our other future plans include continue to modify both aspects of the conversion program, MARC to BIBFRAME and BIBFRAME to MARC, particularly with punctuation retention and removal, treatment of native scripts in the descriptive fields, and incorporating the creation and conversion to create BIBFRAME hubs. We need to continue reviewing, or we need to really focus on reviewing the BIBFRAME data that's output from our editor and how it's converted to MARC. My earlier tests with this on our original editor were inconsistent. A lot of the data was presented in a way that was correct or workable, but other fields were not, particularly where we were supplying default data within the editor templates so that the catalogers would not have to input a lot of repetitive information over and over. And so I imagine that as we work through the data output from the editor, it will mean modifying the editor software and possibly modifying the editor templates to produce data that can be better output for use in the ILS. And we need to develop the workflow that will go with this. I anticipate it'll be a batch process. I don't think we will have the catalogers do their work in the BIBFRAME editor and then immediately export it into Voyager, but who knows? It's too early to predict what will happen there. And I don't know yet if any creation or editing of Voyager holdings and items will remain in Voyager, or will we augment the BIBFRAME item profiles to supply some of this information? That's still to be determined. And I will leave you with some additional URLs. The first one is our general BIBFRAME information page. The second one is the GitHub repository where you can download the conversion programs and test them yourself. And I also want to encourage you to try out our comparison viewer, where you can input an LCCN and see on the left side of the screen how it looks in BIBFRAME, and in the right side how it is converted to MARC. I will upload the slides after the presentation so that everybody has access to them. And with that, I will leave you with a photo of cherry blossoms from last year and say thank you.
Thank you, Jody. That was a lot of material in a short period of time. Gonna probably be looking at the video of that for a while. So thank you much. We do have a few questions, and I will turn that part over to Michelle for the moment. And please, if you have any more questions, either for the previous presentation with Gioia and Charlene, please feel free to throw those in as well. So off to you, Michelle.
Okay, Jody, the first question is specifically about the 260 field. When the 260 fields are moved to 264, why is the comma in subfield B the only mark of punctuation retained?
Of course, I've closed my presentation.
Okay.
And I can't go back and look at it. That could possibly be an input error by the presenter in preparing her slides. It's also possible that the comma was retained when it was converted, but I'm going to go with input error by me.
Okay. Yeah, that wasn't fair to ask you that after you've closed your slide presentation. Okay. The next question is, did you have to adjust your OPAC or MARC discovery systems to account for the differences, like the 007 becoming the 340?
We are still working with our ILS office on display changes that will be required, that we think will be required.
Yeah. And another question is, have you successfully converted a native BIBFRAME description into MARC and imported it into your ILS? Maybe that's the same question.
Not yet.
Okay. What do you still need to do to get that to be possible?
Well, the biggest thing is there are some elements in the BIBFRAME editor data that appear just fine. But when I would go to convert that particular description to MARC, things were missing, like the 040 field. And I think it's because a lot of those elements we are pre-supplying as defaults in the editor so that the cataloger does not have to input them over and over again. And I just don't think that the editor was picking up that default data and converting it to MARC. And I also have not tried outputting and converting from the new editor. I anticipate it will be the same, but I won't know until I try.
Thank you for explaining that. We still have time for questions for Charlene and Gioia and Jody. So if you have any more questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A.
All right. Well.
Oh, we have a couple more questions.
Excellent.
So the first one is for Charlene and Gioia about the study group. Do you think that your administration would have supported the time that was spent in the study group if we weren't in a pandemic time?
I would like to respond first. Gioia can chime in. Definitely, I received strong support from my supervisor. So because this is one of the top priority, as you can see, NYU have partnership with Share-VDE. So I just want to let you know, yes, this will definitely we will receive the support.
Gioia, do you want to add anything?
No, not really. I mean, it wasn't exactly release time. It was, a meeting every 2 weeks with some optional but highly recommended homework. So I think, it was fairly easy to fit in along with our regular work.
Okay, the next question is, maybe it's for me. It says, does Sinopia BIBFRAME convert to MARC using the LC tool? So I can answer that. And the answer is no. And I think it has to do with the way that the data in Sinopia is structured. We're trying to use the templates being developed by PCC. And I don't know if that matches exactly the structure of the data in the Library of Congress BIBFRAME editor. So right now, Sinopia uses a much scaled down converter. It doesn't convert all the fields. It's just creating like a stub record. But that's a really good question. And I can talk to the Sinopia developers about if we're going to look at the latest developments with the Library of Congress BIBFRAME to MARC tool and try to incorporate those.
I also think there's just different ways that the RDF gets shaped as it comes out of different editors, and our BIBFRAME to MARC conversion is very tuned to how our data is shaped. And if the Sinopia structure is a little different, that can cause obstacles with the conversion.
Yes, definitely. And now a question for Jody. Does a more complex 260, that is one that contains publisher and distributor info or multiple locations or multiple publishers, have any issues when converted?
The 260 subfielding is very helpful in this aspect because the subfields in a 260 field that address, I think it's distribution, are sent off into the BIBFRAME provision activity distribution section. And so they will come back separately as a 264 field with the second indicator of, I'm guessing 2, but I might be wrong. Multiple cities. I think it depends on how clean the 260 field is. If all of the places of publication are within a single subfield A, then there would be a single provision activity of place, and they would all go back into a single subfield A in the 264. But if they're in separate subfield A's, they might get separate places and then go back into separate subfield A's, but I have not looked at this recently, so I'm half guessing.
Okay, another question for Jody. Do you plan to make the MARC to BIBFRAME and BIBFRAME to MARC programs available to the public? And will LC work with organizations such as OCLC to make record conversion easier for libraries in general?
All of our conversion programs and specifications are available to the public. You can find them on the GitHub address that I included on my slides is just specific for the BIBFRAME to MARC. But if you go to loc.gov/BIBFRAME, there's links on that front page to both the MARC to BIBFRAME and the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion programs and specifications. And we have been working with other organizations like OCLC and Share-VDE to discuss data exchange and record conversion.
Great, thank you for making all that available. That, I think, does anyone have any last questions they'd like to ask? Okay, then I will hand it back to Paul for final remarks.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for handling all those questions. If you do have additional questions that occur to you later, please feel free to drop them into our Slack in the appropriate channel, probably be the general one. We'd like to continue this conversation well after the conference is done. We will also be posting, oh, looks like a new question just popped up. This one's from Ingrid. Again, the new BF editor seems very promising. When will that sandbox be available to the broader LIS community? So I guess that's for you, Jody.
And I believe we'll put it up reasonably soon. This question also came up in the previous presentation, and I can't remember what the answer was in that chat. But we're still working. It's come a long way in just a couple of months. And so I suspect we want to fine tune it just a tiny bit more before it goes out to the public.
All right. Thank you. I think it was kind of left up in the air, a little nebulous, so which is understandable. So much to do. Anyway, well, I'd like to extend thank yous to Gioia, Charlene, and Jody for wonderful presentations. This hopefully will generate lots of discussions later. Oh, we just got a message from Paul Frank. Says, soon. I hope to get up there within a few weeks. So excellent. So still kind of nebulous, but a little bit more defined. I'd also like to extend a thank you to Michelle Fatornik for answering all the questions and overall being a good co-host for this particular presentation. So thank you all attendees. We appreciate you showing up, and please stick around for the rest of the programs for later today and this afternoon, or in the morning, or whatever your particular time zone frame of mind is. Thank you for attending. We will see you later. Bye-bye.